to take a step back, mercury for therapeutic purposes was prevalent until the 20th century, when the detrimental effects of exposure became notorious. In efforts to eliminate mercury-related diseases, the WHO has emphasized the need to identify traditional practices involving mercury. Nonetheless, mercury in traditional healthcare is still widely used today in Chinese traditional medicine under the name of cinnabaris, used in Caribbean and Latin American traditions, and in more recently discovered in South African traditional medicine. In here it's used, the name is, it's a type of imikandu, and the colloquial name for mercury is isigidi, which literally means millions. I guess that's what happened when if you splash on the floor, it just breaks up into a million little pieces. So asking the healers who uses it and why, 78 of them said they use it for traditional healing, it was 39%. There was no real difference between any demographic characteristics and why they used it. So there were two main reasons people use mercury in traditional medicine from my sample. 90% of those 78 said that they use it for childbirth. Yes, take a pause. The reason it's used for childbirth, it's actually, people are asked to drink it, and because it is such a weight, it's supposed to bring on labor. So it's when people are in late stages, they're tired of being pregnant and they want to now bring on childbirth. It's that people are advised to drink it, and it will pull the baby down. The second one that came up was protection from guns. So it's used in the taxi industry quite a lot. If you think there's someone's got a hit on you and you want to protect yourself and you drink mercury, the gun will literally be drawn to the floor and you will not be able to be shot. So this is what came up, and really interesting. So, and it came up by time and time again, independently interviewing healers on the reasons why people. So it's pregnant women and taxi bosses, but mainly for protection against guns. A couple of other reasons came up for sterility. You can use it during pregnancy, protectional rituals, gynecological complaints. But needless to say, mercury shouldn't be used in this way for healing purposes. The modes of mercury, it's mostly used orally, but a lot of people said they also use it for subcutaneous implantations, making cuts and adding it to the skin, which obviously is going to be an issue with the vapors. Two people said they use it as an enema. Two people said it used in a bath, and a couple of people said one said inhalation and one said licking off the hand. It's a traditional way of administering muti. So just to move on to the findings from the copper sulfate and why that is used. So a couple more people used it. It was 72% of the healers used it. It's strongly associated with gender. It was reportedly administered to individuals of all age, including infants and children. The main route is enema, once again. It's also used orally, and it's used in baths. The reasons cited for use were diverse and included skin rashes, aches and pains, as well as STDs. My main concern is in the case of copper poisoning incidence data that we have in this country, exposure types may be misclassified to that of an agrochemical exposure, where people it actually could be related directly to the use of traditional medicine. So that needs to be discussed from a poisoning data collection point of view. Okay. So the last study I'm going to talk you through is one of our more recent studies that we're busy doing at the moment. The data I'm going to present in the last couple of slides is very prelim and hot off the press, but I would love to share it with you. So it's an investigation of multi-metal exposure from artisanal cookware. So in developing countries, as we know, informal recycling and metal-containing products and e-waste is widespread. It is an important socio-economic safety net for many, but can pose a risk of human health, to human health and the environment. So an example of recycling scrap metal is the casting of liquid aluminium from a collection of scrap metal into cooking pots. So this study first came about where in Cameroon a study on locally manufactured artisanal cookware revealed that the raw materials used were engine parts, aluminium waste and e-waste. This revealed that the cookware was a source of metals including cadmium and lead. A second study investigated cookware from 10 developing countries and showed that aluminium, arsenic, cadmium and lead were present in some of the leachates coming from the pot in potentially harmful substances. So a couple of months ago, my director was driving around in Limpopo and noticed these poiki pots and said something looks a bit different about them. They're not that same cast iron look, and they happen to be very shiny and aluminium looking. So the previous studies that were done, they hadn't involved Southern Africa, but we decided to investigate a little bit. And it turns out that in South Africa, these pots have been in circulation for over 2 decades. I found that newspaper article from 2 decades ago talking about pensions cooked with time bomb pots. And so I'm trying to read you it's quite interesting. I know you can't see it there. But it said thousands of pensioners in South Africa run the risk of lead poisoning or having toxic cooking pots exploding in their faces as a Mozambican syndicate smuggle thousands of defective poiki pots into the country. So yeah, so that was 2 decades ago. The picture that I'm showing on the slide is at Mansell Market in Durban. There's hundreds of these aluminium poiki pots sold there, and they are actually coming across from Mozambique. They are bussed across, and from that depot, they are then sent. There are other buses that take these pots to Lesotho and Swaziland and all over the place, all over South Africa. So we decided to investigate if the same situation is happening in South Africa, because they've never been investigated before as a source of heavy metal exposure to South Africans. So the pot making process itself is quite interesting. I took a field trip up to meet with some local South African pot makers. Although I said many of the pots are coming from across the border, there are people in South Africa, in the rural communities, that are making them and selling them to their local communities. You can see there the scrap metal. There's a rim of a tire, there's an old iron, part of an engine box, a lot of just different metal sources. And the second picture on your right is the burning site where the metals are burnt, melted. So that's a typical workstation. It's an indoor process, and normally 2 or 3 people are making these pots. They make it out of a mold of an existing pot, and they cast it using, it's a sand casting. They use river sand or, sand from, it's always that same dark, very dark soil and soil. And they pour the metal in, and it casts into a pot. So the process itself, I could spend hours on, but it's fascinating. There's a very interesting YouTube video on it. If anyone would like to see it after this, I'll share it with everybody. So, as I said, the pots are made from molds from soil before casting the aluminium. It is really hard work. They're stamping the soil. To make one pot can take anything between 45 minutes to a couple of hours. They use a handmade furnace from metal drums, and you can see that scrap metal in the far right drum being melted down. You can see not a lot of protective gear by these people making the pots, mostly barefoot, no tops on. You can see the metal splashing out, this very, very hot metal, and obviously the fumes itself from the metals as you're making the pots is a concern. So the first objective of our study was to examine the risks posed by this cookware, which is available in South Africa. And we decided to screen the cookware for the different metals, and then to also see what's coming out of the pots itself, the leachates, what's migrating from the pots, and then to determine the deterioration of the cookware over time. So we first, okay, so those are just the, skip through them, yeah, sorry, in the interest of time, okay. So we got, we managed to find these pots in 5 different provinces, not trying too hard, they're quite easy to find. Every time someone went on a field trip, we said, oh, bring me a pot, and everybody brought a pot from various places they went to. We actually have excellent Austria collaborators, because this particular part of the grant is funded by the NRF. We've got an Austrian collaborator, so we took some samples of our pots over there to test for the metals in the pots. We first wanted to digest the whole piece of pot to see what was in there. Now that's going into the acid digestion. Digestion attempt 1, which is the little pieces of the pot at the bottom you can see, and then filled up with acid. It came out looking, with that orangey stuff, it should have come out looking like clear water. We had to do numerous attempts. This product just would not digest, and it turned out later it was because of the high silica content in these pots as well. So aluminium and silica are the most abundant products in these pots. But I will share with you a little bit about the migration after putting a piece of the pot in the 3% acetic acid, which is one of the ways to test the migration of the metals coming out of the pots. Aluminium was extremely high in these pots. So currently there's the European Union has a maximum of 5 milligrams per litre to be migrated from cookware. Our results were, the median was about 100 times more than that. There's a huge body burden of aluminium possibly from these pots. You can see that the first one is the SS sample 1 to 20, and the L1, L2, L3 are the different leachings. Sorry, I don't have a pointer, but so you can see, for example, sample 1, it was a little bit higher, then the aluminium dropped slightly and then went higher again. The results were all over the place, so we couldn't quite work out what was going on. But when we looked at the pot using a microscope before and after, the deterioration of the pot is so extreme that it changes the profile completely. And every time you're using this pot, different pockets of metals are being leached out. So, yeah, and of course every pot has a different metal profile because it depends on what scrap metal was available on that day. We did test 18 elements, but I'm just showing you now the last one, which is the lead. Also quite frightening levels of lead coming out of the pots. The EU maximum permissible level is 10 micrograms per litre. Our maximum one was 149, the median being 11. Again, inconsistencies. One pot it was high, then it came low, then it came up again. Really diverse numbers, but this was also found in the previous study, so it is it's the way the pots are deteriorating over time. So obviously that phase was just the first phase, which we're busy writing up and figuring out the best communication plan going forward. But we also want to do some field research using, that was in the lab with 3% acetic acid. We now plan to use those same pots using food, maybe an acidic food and a sort of mealie-meal based food, something like that, to cook to see the metals that leaches from the pots to the food. We're also doing an occupational risk survey in the pot makers themselves. We've spoken to quite a few of them. We've located 12 different sites in Limpopo and in Mpumalanga. And the pot makers are really keen for us to work with them, as they know this is a risky business. They say they throw various things into the flames and they explode and it could cause more harm. So working with them in terms of how to safeguard their own health. Another study we planned is to test the blood lead levels of people using the pots compared to not using the pots, to see if there's a difference. But obviously this part of the study is just at its infancy now. There's a lot that still needs to be done to figure out what's actually going on with these pots and how to best safeguard the consumer. So in conclusion, there have been successes. You know, the scientific evidence has been put into policy, like the phase out of lead in petrol, regulating the lead content, and the strengthening of the lead paint regulations, which is ongoing. You know, awareness is another very important avenue. Lead poisoning is a disease of poverty with the different paints and occupational levels and housing locations. We need to make sure that as many people are aware of the risks as possible when being exposed to these various metals, and all metals generally. And then one of the biggest, for me, the next challenge is the unfinished agenda, which is the informal sector, the hard to reach places and the people that need, you know, the income the most from these work, but they're also being the most affected. So how to work together to mitigate the risks from the metals. Okay, thank you.